Hi, welcome to McCann Cyber Investigations monthly podcast, Volume 2. This is Mark Miller. I'm the General Counsel for McCann Investigations and McCann Cyber. I'm joined today by our Managing Partner, Daniel Weiss, and our resident forensics expert, Brett Dearman. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hi, Mark.
Thanks for joining us. We've got about 3 topics we want to jump into right away and discuss. And the first topic we want to talk about today is the revelation of yet another hack of a adult dating site. In what was in the news the last couple of weeks was that the website Adult Friend Finder was hacked, exposing almost 400 million user accounts. And this is kind of a follow-up to the hack of Ashley Madison, also an adult dating website that occurred in 2015. And from a factual standpoint, what happened was internally there were some weaknesses at Adult Friend Finder that allowed hackers and intruders to escape, intrude, and get away with almost 400 million user accounts. And in that user account information is a wide variety of information that the individuals who go to this website, there's actually a family of websites, but most prominently it's Adult Friend Finder, and they put in their name, their gender, their age, some of their preferences, and oftentimes credit card information. So there's some pretty sensitive information. And so I want to start off our conversation. There's really 2 sides to this hack of Adult Friend Finder. The first side would be the exposure or the issues that it creates for the company or the corporation Adult Friend Finder. And then the second issue would be, what's the fallout for the users who had their information exposed in such a delicate type of situation. And so the first question I want to ask, I'll throw it over to you, Brett, is tell us a little bit about your understanding about how the information, the user accounts were obtained.
Well, to be honest with you, I'm not exactly sure how it was done, but I have a pretty good idea that it was something that occurred on the inside, that somebody had a weak password, and that allowed hackers to basically brute force their way in just with a regular login account.
And of course, that's a fairly common thing that we read about internally for corporations, is that they themselves, certainly in the IT department, might not be enforcing appropriate password rules. Tell us a little bit about what best practices would be in that area.
Well, there's really 2 things that you need to focus on, and this applies to individuals as well as the corporate or the enterprise environment. Is you need to focus on regular password changes and forced complexity. So in other words, you want people to change their passwords on a regular basis. Like I tell some of my clients here in South Texas, this is really putting it in the South Texas vernacular, but passwords are like underwear. They work best when they're changed often. So, and that usually gets a good laugh out of my clients, but the most important thing is they remember it, and that's the important thing, is changing those passwords on a regular basis. In certain circumstances, even weekly password changes is not an unusual or unrealistic request. And then forcing the complexity. A lot of people complain, the passwords are so hard to remember. There's techniques that you can use that help you remember what your password is on a regular basis. And if I can, I'll just take 10 seconds and explain that to you.
Sure.
What you do is you take a word, a noun, a name, something that you remember, but it's something you will always remember, and hopefully it won't be too terribly hard or it won't be very easy for someone else to guess. So you could use the word equine, like if you're a horse fanatic, use the word equine, and then follow it with the month that it currently is. For example, equine December, and then put a number, any number, 1 through 0. And in that way, you always know what your password is because you can figure, well, I always use Equine. The month is December, and all I have to do is guess at the number at the end of it. That's complex, but it's easy to remember.
Tell me your thoughts on the different impact it can have for the password of a regular employee versus people who are in the IT department or the security department.
That is a great question. People in the IT department typically have what we refer to as elevated privileges. They have a little higher security clearance to do certain things than the typical user. Especially a customer. Their IDs and passwords will be significantly lower on the permission scale, but an IT employee will have, and in a lot of cases, administrators will have full administrative rights to do everything there is to do, including shut down servers. So, and that's an IT best practice that you need to work on. You never want to give a user more rights than they really need to do their job, and it helps prevent that sort of thing.
And so would it be safe to say, or would you agree with, if somebody who's in the IT department at a sufficient level, whether it's a system administrator or a manager, and their credentials or password are hacked, does an outsider almost have the keys to the castle? Is that a fair assessment?
That would be a very valid assumption at that point. You're right.
Dan, let me ask you this. One of the things that we regularly encounter is that corporations, small, medium, and large, often audit their financial sectors within their own company. What's your opinion on whether companies should audit or assess their IT departments, and how do you see that in your practice?
Well, we know from our experience that the top IT people, the oversight that they have from the other executive staff at this point in time is fairly limited, meaning the average age of the CEO is in the 50s and 60s, and the IT person's a lot younger than that. They don't have a lot of crossover experience, and in fact, when you talk to them, what they'll tell you is they really not 100% sure what their IT people do. That, of course, opens up opportunities for criminal activity, inappropriate activities that aren't in the corporate interest, and oftentimes when you talk to executives, they say that, the IT people are the ones responsible for checking for malware, spyware, holes in the network, and that they're in essence self-auditing themselves. And just as we have that discussion, as I say it, and we're discussing it, it becomes apparent to anyone listening that's not a good idea. And so what we talk about with our clients is it's important to have an outside party act as an auditor and a review on the IT staff, that no one in a company, be it a senior IT person or a senior financial person or even a general counsel, should be without review and audit. And there's mechanisms and ways to go about doing that we discuss with our clients.
Let me touch for just a second on some of the corporate responsibilities when there is a hack or a network intrusion like this. So depending on where the corporation is, it depends on state to state. It depends on the type of information that was stolen or exported, ranging from name, date of birth, social security number. The corporations often have notification requirements. They might be subject to a privacy class action lawsuit by the users, and we've seen a lot of that. Certainly when personally identifiable information, which is a kind of a buzzword and a keyword in this area, is disclosed or lost to the hackers, there's a greatly elevated responsibility on the corporation to notify its users, thereby hopefully triggering password changes by the users and things of that nature. Sometimes they offer credit monitoring services and those types of services. So beyond that, I want to move into now what we see on the user side, what kind of exposure that they have. And we saw this with the Ashley Madison case, that hack of that adult dating website, and this most recent hack of Adult Friend Finder. And Dan, I'm going to ask you, what do you see in the regular practice here at McCann as being an exposure for users who have their information exposed, and people who actually aren't involved at all, but also might be in danger of being claimed to have been using the site?
Yeah. Well, I think that the Adult Friend Finder hack, to simplify it, is a pre-made extortion list. People just like Ashley Madison, that they're not out dating sites. What I mean by that is they're not, people that are known single people engaged in online dating where their information is out there and people know it. These are people that are traditionally married or in relationships and are trying to engage in, extracurricular, if you will, relationships, extramarital affairs, and it's not something they want exposed. So by default, they're at risk for being blackmailed, and that can be something as simple as, the hacker buying that list, oftentimes on the dark net, and sending an email saying, Mr. Miller, your information, was on Adult Friend Finder. This is your username. This was your preferences. We know that this is you, and we'd like you to pay us, $100 in Bitcoin or wire money somewhere, or we're going to expose your information to the following people. And what we see is oftentimes they will tell the future victim that they understand who they are and who they're connected to on other social media sites. So many people expose their information on social media, and you can identify who someone's significant other is, who their families are, and people don't typically want that sort of information exposed to their significant others in such a blunt way.
And although the information's still trickling out on the Adult Friend Finder hack, in the Ashley Madison hack, there were certain users that even had the images that they had shared, the chat that they had engaged in. So information that was well beyond just a name and an email, and perhaps gender and age and some preferences. So there's some pretty damaging information that can come out in these situations. And I think we also saw, Dan, and correct me if I'm wrong, that some of the more sophisticated criminal organizations will in fact do some research on their targets and figure out if they're a member of a church group or a political organization. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, and even doing some cross-referencing on the zip codes to try to identify high net worth individuals.
And then, just again, you mentioned it very briefly. Tell us how this information is peddled on the dark net.
Well, if you go on the dark net, so we discussed it in the last podcast, but if you basically go on via the Tor browser and you look at some of these illegal marketplaces, that information is being actively sold and fairly easy to buy. So, for example, the Ashley Madison information, which are millions of records available literally for dollars, not hundreds of dollars, but literally dollars. And you could procure an entire list and file. And so it could give you names, addresses, emails, sometimes credit card information, that in essence is a pre-baked extortion list. And I'm not trying to oversimplify the topic. I'm just telling you it's actually that simple to procure that information. So you're not having to talk about some sophisticated organized crime syndicate out of Singapore. It could a criminal who lives next door to you, who wants to get up, and thinks if he sends out a mass email and gets a 3% response rate, it's well worth their time to do it.
And we saw in the aftermath of the Ashley Madison hack, and I'm sure we'll see it with the Adult Friend Finder one, that several websites popped up that were claiming to help you figure out if your information was in the leaked hacked information, and they were separate websites. Tell me your opinion on those websites trying to help people out and figure out if they were on the list of exposed user accounts.
I mean, that was a more ingenious, most of those are fairly ingenious criminal endeavor to pre-qualify those that were concerned, right? So I would go see if my name was on the list, and all that did was tell the criminals who are running that site that we have someone who's concerned enough to check, and they're pre-qualifying themselves in extortion. If you're concerned about if you're on that list, I would highly recommend that you get a qualified private investigator to be able to look at that information for you. I would not do it yourself.
And did you ever see, and Brett, I'll throw this to you if you saw it as well, people who were in fact maybe the subject or target of blackmail and extortion when they weren't on the list, or they were added, by the criminals to some subset of information? And how did they go about proving a negative, or how does that play out that they weren't involved?
That's a tough one. It varies from case to case. It just depends on the profile of the individual and how high that profile actually is. But it ranged from everything from people who were input into the system by someone else as a prank or a joke or a gotcha, get even, whatever you want to call it. All the way to people of high net worth, I guess is the best way to put it.
And certainly once the data set of stolen information is out on the internet, is there anything to stop people from adding names to the list, or at least the people who are offering up that data set? I mean, is there anything to stop them from doing that?
No, there's nothing stopping them. I mean, the crime has been committed, and you're dealing with with criminals to start with, and then so it doesn't make any. They certainly don't have any qualms about adding to if they think it's going to benefit them. So no, there's nothing stopping them from doing it.
Well, all in all, I think people who are listening can see that there are a bunch of issues that arise for people who are both involved and users of the service, and potentially some individuals who are in no way connected to it. It can create problems for you in addition to the company or the corporation. And I noticed it was just in this past week that Ashley Madison settled one of the class action privacy lawsuits brought by the users, and then they were also agreed to a fine by the Federal Trade Commission. So there's ramifications and fallout on both sides.
Interestingly, though, they're also reporting a continued increase in growth of users.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, it's a growth industry, I guess.
Yeah,
so I guess you could analogize it to the crack or the cocaine epidemic, and despite all the heavy penalties that can be associated with that, the user base also can continue to grow. So
yeah,
I'm not sure if that's a tortured analogy, but nevertheless, yeah, in any event, it sells itself, both sex and cocaine, I suppose.